You know how to push his buttons, my mother whispered while I sat on the bathroom floor at 14, pressing a cold wet cloth to my ribs. That was the sentence I grew up hearing. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "He had no right to do that." Just, "You know how to push his buttons." Like the bruises were something I chose. For 18 years, every time my father hit me, my mother waited until he left the room and said something like that. And for 18 years I believed her. I believed I was the problem. The day I moved out, she called and told me I was ruining the family. I said, "You watched him ruin me for 18 years and said nothing." She hung up. 6 months of silence. Then she called again, crying. And she said something I never thought I would hear from her. It wasn't an apology. It was bigger than that. And it changed everything. Before I go on, if this story feels true to you, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you truly connect with what I'm about to tell you. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. My name is Megan. I'm 24. I'm a nurse at a small community hospital in Ohio. Now, let me take you back to the summer I turned 14. The summer I finally understood that my mother was never going to protect me. If you drove past our house on Maple Ridge Lane, you would think you were looking at the most normal American family on the block. A white house with black shutters, a lawn so neat it looked like Richard Moore mowed it with a ruler, which honestly he might have. There was always a flag on the porch, always a wreath on the door that matched the season, and always a Ford F-250 in the driveway, washed every Saturday morning before anyone else on the street was awake. My father was a deacon at Grace Baptist Church. He owned a small building company with about 15 workers, mostly fixing up stores and doing jobs for the town. He coached Little League for 3 years, not because he loved baseball, but because the parents in the bleachers were the same people who sat on the town planning board. Everything Richard Moore did had an audience, and every audience had a purpose. My mother, Linda, was the woman who always showed up to potluck dinners with a warm casserole and a buttoned-up cardigan, her hair pinned back, her smile soft, her voice quiet. She called every man "sir," and every woman "sweetheart." And if you had asked anyone in town to describe her, they would have said, devoted wife, good Christian woman. And then there was me, the quiet girl in the third row every Sunday, sitting between my parents with my hands folded in my lap, wearing long sleeves in July. Nobody asked why. Not once. Not the Sunday school teachers, not the neighbors, not the women who told my mother what a beautiful family she had. Nobody looked past the flag on the porch or the mowed lawn or my father's handshake. Firm enough to make men respect him. Gentle enough to fool everyone else. If you had driven past our house, you would have been wrong about us. Everyone was. The first time I remember it clearly, I was 10. I had forgotten to wash the dishes after dinner. Not refused. Forgotten. I was doing homework at the kitchen table, and the plates were still in the sink when my father came back from the garage. He didn't yell. That's what people never understand. Richard Moore didn't raise his voice. He slowly pulled his chair back from the table, set both hands flat on the wood, and said in that low, calm voice that still makes my back go stiff, "Come here." The bedroom door closed. What happened behind it? I'm not going to describe. I'll just tell you that the next morning I counted 3 bruises below my ribs on the left side, and I learned to wash the dishes before I sat down to do anything else. What I remember most isn't the pain. It's what came after. My mother walked into my room about 20 minutes later, after his truck pulled out of the driveway. She sat on the edge of my bed. She didn't look at the bruises. She looked at my face and whispered, "You know, Daddy doesn't like dirty dishes. Why do you keep pushing him?" Like I had pressed a button. Like what happened to me was a natural result of my own carelessness. I was 10. My brother Ethan was 4 at the time. He was in the living room watching cartoons while it happened. My father never touched him. Not once back then. Ethan was the son, the one who carried the family name, the one my father called Buddy, and took to job sites on Saturdays. I used to think the difference between us was simple. Ethan was good, and I was the problem. It took me 14 more years to understand that wasn't true. By the time I was 14, I had been to the emergency room 3 times. Each visit had the same script. My mother drove. My father came along, calm and concerned, his hand resting on my shoulder like a father in a feel-good movie. "She's so clumsy," Linda told the intake nurse. "Always running around, never looking where she's going." And she would laugh that soft, practiced laugh. And the nurse would smile back, Because why wouldn't she? The man standing next to us was a church deacon. He coached Little League. He smelled like Old Spice and fresh sawdust. The third visit, though, I remember the doctor pausing. She looked at my arm, then at my chart, then at me. I could feel her question before she asked it. Is someone hurting you? My father's hand tightened on my shoulder. Not hard enough for the doctor to see. Just hard enough for me to feel. She fell down the stairs again, he said and smiled. I keep telling her, no running in socks. The doctor wrote something in the chart. I found out years later what it said. Repeated injuries that don't match the story given. Recommend a CPS follow-up. But CPS never came. In a town where Richard Moore had shaken hands with everyone from the fire chief to the county clerk, a note in a chart was just a note in a chart. I didn't know it then, but that chart, those 5 visits, each one written down with dates, descriptions, and a doctor's notes, was sitting in a medical record system, waiting. Not for a lawyer. Not for a courtroom. Just for the day I would be old enough and smart enough to ask for it. That day was still 10 years away, but the paper trail had already begun. At 16, I got a part-time job at the pharmacy on Grant Street. I didn't ask my father's permission. I asked my school counselor to sign the work permit, told him it was for college savings, and started bagging prescriptions 3 afternoons a week at $9.25 an hour. My father found out within a week. He didn't like it. Not because he cared about my schedule, but because a girl with her own paycheck is a girl with choices. And Richard Moore did not raise his children to have choices he didn't control. No daughter of mine needs to work, he said at dinner. His voice was pleasant. His eyes weren't. People will think I can't provide. I kept the job. I kept every dollar in a shoebox under my bed, tucked behind a stack of old textbooks. By the end of 6 months, I had $412. Enough for a security deposit on the smallest apartment in the county, if I ever needed one. My mother saw the shoebox once. I came home and found her standing in my room, staring at it on my desk like it was a bomb. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me with an expression I couldn't figure out. Part fear, part something else, maybe envy or recognition. Like she was looking at a version of herself who had made a different choice at 22. Then my father found it. He took every dollar, counted it at the kitchen table in front of me, folded the bills into his wallet, and said, "Money earned under my roof belongs to this household." I didn't cry that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and I started hiding cash inside a tampon box in the bathroom cabinet, and I started counting days. At 17, I had saved enough for a deposit and first month's rent on a small studio apartment 2 towns over. I had been accepted into the nursing program at the community college. I applied without telling anyone, used the school library computer, and had the acceptance letter sent to a P.O. box I rented for $11 a month. But mail is a tricky thing in a house where one person controls everything. The day the second copy of my financial aid summary arrived, the one I had accidentally had sent to the house, my father was the one who opened the mailbox. He brought the envelope to dinner and set it next to the salt shaker. He didn't mention it until we were all seated, forks in hand, steam rising from the mashed potatoes my mother had spent an hour making. "What's this?" he asked. His voice was casual, almost curious. I looked at the envelope. My stomach dropped. "It's mine," I said. He opened it slowly, read it, then looked at me, not angry, not yet, and said, "You think you're leaving?" It wasn't a question. Nobody in this family makes a decision without going through me. He tore the letter slowly. One clean rip down the middle. Then another. 4 pieces laid neatly beside his plate like a place setting. My mother cut her meat. Ethan, 11, small for his age, stared at his plate. Nobody spoke. After dinner, I went to my room and called the admissions office from under my blanket. "I need a replacement copy," I whispered. The original was damaged. The woman on the other end paused, then said gently, "We'll send a new one to whatever address you'd like, sweetheart." I gave her the P.O. box number. I left on my 18th birthday. My father was at a job site. I had checked his schedule the night before. A building job 40 minutes away. He wouldn't be back until 6. My mother was in the kitchen. I had 2 suitcases, a backpack, and my friend Rachel's car running at the curb. I carried the first suitcase down the stairs, and my mother didn't turn around. She was standing at the counter, her back to me, washing a dish that was already clean. "If you leave," she said, Who's going to help me with dinner? It wasn't really about dinner. I know that now. It was the only way Linda Moore knew how to say, please don't go, without admitting why she needed me to stay. If I was in the house, I was the one who got hit instead of someone else. If I left, that someone else would have to be Ethan. I set the suitcase by the door and walked to Ethan's room. He was sitting on his bed, 12 years old, trying not to cry. I knelt in front of him and held both his hands. I'm going to come back for you, I said. I promise. He nodded. He didn't ask me to stay. Even at 12, he understood that staying meant something worse than missing me. I hugged him, picked up my bags, and walked to the front door. My mother never turned around. But when I got to Rachel's car and looked back at the house just once, I saw my mother standing behind the living room curtain. One hand pressed flat against the glass, watching. For 1 second, the curtain stayed open. Then it fell. That was the last time I saw my mother for 6 months. 3 weeks after I left, I was sitting on the floor of my studio apartment, mattress on the ground, one lamp from Goodwill, curtains I had bought at the IKEA clearance rack for $7. And for the first time in my life, I noticed something. Silence. Not the kind of silence that comes before a door slams. The kind that just exists peaceful, ordinary. Then my phone rang. My mother's name on the screen. I almost didn't answer. But some part of me, the part that had spent 18 years hoping she would choose me, picked up. She didn't ask how I was, didn't ask about the apartment, the job, or the program. She went straight to it. Your father isn't eating. He's not sleeping. The house feels wrong without you. A pause. Then, you're ruining this family, Megan. Do you know what people at church are saying? I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, and I felt something shift. Not exactly anger. Something quieter. Clarity. You watched him ruin me for 18 years and said nothing, I said. Don't call me to say I'm the one breaking things. Silence. Not the good kind. Then a click. She hung up. I set the phone on the floor beside me, leaned my head against the wall, and stared at the water stain on the ceiling. It looked like a map of somewhere I had never been. I didn't cry. I think I had used up all my crying somewhere between age 10 and 17. And there was nothing left. Just a hollow, ringing quiet. I thought she would call back. That night, the next day, that week. She didn't. 6 months of nothing. I finished my first year of nursing school with a 3.7 GPA and a constant knot between my shoulder blades from working double shifts at the nursing home on Route 9. My apartment was small, but clean. A small plant on the windowsill, a second-hand bookshelf, scrubs drying on a rack by the radiator. It wasn't much, but every single thing in that room was something I had chosen, and that made it more mine than any bedroom I had ever had on Maple Ridge Lane. I tried to call Ethan 3 times. Each time, it went to voicemail. The 4th time, a text came back from my father's number. Stop calling this phone. Richard had taken Ethan's cell. Of course he had. You can't control a boy if his sister keeps reminding him there's a world outside the house. At night, alone, I would lie in bed and think, is he okay? Is Ethan sitting in that room right now, counting the cracks on the ceiling the way I used to? And then the harder question, the one that sat on my chest like a heavy stone. Did I abandon him? One evening I was scrolling through Facebook, not something I did often, and I saw the Grace Baptist Church page. A photo of my father grinning wide, arm around Pastor David, standing in front of a banner I had to read twice to believe. 2025 Man of the Year nominee, Richard Moore. Below the photo, a comment from Linda's account. So proud of this man and this family. God is good. The family in that photo was 3 people. I had been cut out. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I closed the app, turned off the light, and lay in the dark, listening to the silence that used to feel safe. That silence felt different now. And then, at 11 at night in mid-October, my phone rang again. I almost didn't recognize her voice at first. Not because it had changed, but because I had never heard my mother cry. Not like this. Not raw and out of control. The kind of sound that comes out when you have held something inside so long it breaks. Megan. Her voice cracked on the second syllable. Megan, please don't hang up. I didn't speak. I just held the phone. He started hitting Ethan. The room tilted. I pressed my hand flat against the mattress to steady myself, like the floor might actually move. When? I asked. After you left. Slowly at first, shoving, grabbing. Ethan talked back about going to prom with his friends. Your father. She couldn't finish the sentence. She tried again. He hit him, Megan. Hard. Like he used to hit you. She couldn't say it. But we both heard it. And then she said the thing. The sentence I had played over 1,000 times in my head since. The one I never in my life expected to hear from Linda Moore. I recorded it on my old phone. I have the audio. His voice. What he said. All of it. Megan, I was wrong about everything. About all of it. I'm so sorry. I sat on the edge of my mattress in the dark, and I felt something crack open inside me that I thought had healed shut years ago. Not forgiveness. I wasn't there yet. Not relief. Something more complicated. Like watching someone you had given up on take one single step in the right direction, and not knowing whether to feel hope or sadness for the 18 years of steps that never came. Send me the file, I said. Tonight. And don't delete it. She sent it at 11:47 p.m. 4 minutes and 22 seconds long. I moved fast. The next morning, I called a legal aid office 2 counties over, far enough that nobody would know the Moore name, and explained my situation. The attorney, a woman named Janet, listened without interrupting, then said, You have options, but your father has a head start on the story. And in small towns, the story is everything. She was right. Because while I was making phone calls and looking into restraining orders, Richard was doing what Richard does best. Controlling the story. Within a week, the version of events spreading through Grace Baptist Church went like this. Megan Moore, troubled since she was young, possibly using drugs, unstable, trying to tear apart a God-fearing family for reasons nobody could quite explain. Richard had told Pastor David in private, his voice heavy with fatherly worry, that he had tried everything, that he prayed for me every night, that he was afraid I was going down a dangerous path. Pastor David called me to check in. His tone was careful and church-like, but I could hear the shape of my father's words underneath his questions. Your father says you've been going through a hard time, Megan. Is there anything the church can do? It spread beyond the church. A co-worker at the hospital, a woman I barely knew, stopped me in the break room. Hey, I heard you're dealing with some family stuff. You okay? Someone mentioned, she trailed off, embarrassed. In a town of 14,000 people, a reputation moves faster than the truth. And my father had spent 3 decades building his, brick by careful brick. Who was going to believe a 24-year-old nurse over a deacon who had poured the foundation for the church's new fellowship hall with his own crew at no extra cost? Nobody. Not yet. The thing about Richard Moore is that he doesn't just control people. He controls their way out. And Ethan's way out had a price tag. $38,000. That was the savings account my parents had built since Ethan was born. A college fund, every birthday check from Grandma Dut, every tax refund bonus, all of it sitting in a savings account at First National under Richard's name. Legally, that money was his to do whatever he wanted with, and he knew it. Ethan called me from a friend's phone one night, his voice barely above a whisper. He had been accepted into an engineering program. A good school, fair tuition, 2 hours from home. A real way out. He sat me down at the kitchen table, Ethan said. He didn't yell. He was calm. He said, You want this money? You do what I say. No contact with your sister. You don't tell anyone what happens in this house. And you come to the Man of the Year ceremony. You wear the suit I bought you. And you smile. I closed my eyes. Meg, I need that money. I can't afford it without it. I don't know what to do. There it was. The leash. The same one Richard had used on me, just with a bigger number attached. He wasn't a father saving for his son's future. He was a man who understood that the cheapest prison is the one you build out of someone else's hope. Don't do anything yet, I told Ethan. Don't agree. Don't refuse. Just wait. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad and wrote 3 things. 1. ER records, my right to ask for them. 2. Linda's audio recording, Ohio one-party consent. 3. I needed a stage, and Richard had just built me one. 2 days later, my phone rang. Not my mother this time. My father. His voice was warm and relaxed, the voice he used at church cookouts and town meetings. The one meant to make you forget he was capable of anything else. Megan, Sweetheart, he said. He hadn't called me that in years. I know we've had our differences, but I want to put that behind us. The church is doing a Man of the Year dinner next Saturday. The whole congregation's going to be there. 200 people, maybe more. I want our family up on that stage together. All 4 of us. Show everybody the Moores are solid. I held the phone and said nothing. Pastor David thinks it would be really meaningful, he continued. The lost daughter comes home. People love that story. I understood exactly what this was. Not an olive branch. A stage direction. Richard needed the image of his family standing together. His daughter returned, smiling, standing beside him. Because the rumors he had planted about me only worked if I stayed away. If I came back willingly, that proved it was all in my head. That proved he was the good father. Case closed. If I said no, he would tell the whole town. See, she's too far gone. Even her own father can't reach her. If I said yes, I would walk back into his picture and disappear inside it. Either way, he won. Unless I came with a different script. I'll be there, Dad, I said. He breathed out, relieved. Victorious, even. That's my girl. I hung up and stared at the wall. My hands weren't shaking. For the first time in my life, they weren't shaking before a conversation with my father. He had invited me onto his stage. He didn't know I was bringing my own. The plan was simple, but it depended on people who had spent their whole lives being anything but brave. I called my mother the next evening and told her what I was going to do. Bring the medical records, play the audio, and let the truth stand in front of the same 200 people my father had spent 30 years performing for. I need you there, I said. I'm not asking you to speak. I'm just asking you to stand. The silence on the other end lasted so long I checked to see if the call had dropped. Megan, I can't. Her voice was small. The same voice she used at the dinner table when my father asked why the roast was dry, or the laundry wasn't folded, or the house wasn't quiet enough. The voice of a woman who had been trained, year by year, to make herself as small as possible. Hill, you don't know what he'll do. Everyone in that church trusts him. They'll look at me like you're what, Mom? Like I let it happen. I let that sit because she did and she knew it. And that knowledge was either going to stop her or push her forward. And I couldn't make that choice for her. You did let it happen, I said. Not to be cruel. Because it was true. And if we were going to stand in a room full of people and tell the truth, we had to start by telling it to each other. But you also pressed record, and that matters. Another silence. Longer. I'll try, she whispered. I'll try to be there. I hung up knowing that try wasn't a promise. My entire plan depended on a woman who had spent 28 years learning how to disappear, and I was asking her to be seen. The next morning, I drove to the county hospital where I had been taken 5 times before the age of 16. I knew the building. I knew the system. I was a nurse. I had spent 2 years working inside the medical record system. And I knew one thing with complete certainty. Under HIPAA, every patient has the legal right to ask for their own medical records. No court order needed. No lawyer required. Just a signed form and a valid ID. The health information office was in the basement. Bright fluorescent lights, beige carpet, a desk stacked with file boxes. The woman behind it was in her 60s, reading glasses on a chain, name tag that said, Barb. I need copies of my records, I said. Emergency room visits. All of them. She looked at my ID, typed my name, and paused. Then she took off her glasses and looked at me. Really looked. The way nobody in this town had looked at me when I was 10 or 12 or 14. I remember your name, she said quietly. 5 ER visits before you turned 16. I always wondered what happened to you. I didn't answer that. I didn't need to. Standard processing is 7 to 10 business days, she said. The dinner you're talking about, the one at Grace Baptist. I hadn't told her about the dinner. She shook her head slightly. Small town. Honey. Everybody knows about that dinner. She turned back to her computer. I'll have these ready by Thursday. Thursday was 2 days before the ceremony. I walked out with a receipt and a timeline. The records would show 5 visits, 3 with the same note. Injuries that don't match the story given. 1 with a recommendation for a CPS follow-up that never happened. Paper has a long memory, even when people choose to forget. 2 days before the ceremony, Richard Moore held a backyard cookout. I heard about it from Ethan, who whispered into his friend's phone from the backyard while my father stood at the grill holding court. A dozen men from the church, elders, deacons, committee leaders, eating pulled pork and laughing at Richard's jokes in the same backyard where, 6 weeks earlier, he had grabbed Ethan by the collar hard enough to tear the stitching. "He's telling everyone you're coming home," Ethan whispered. "He keeps saying, 'My daughter's finally coming back.' Thank the Lord." They're all congratulating him. That evening, I opened Facebook. The Grace Baptist Church page had a new post. A family photo from 8 years ago. Me at 16, Ethan at 10, Linda in the middle, Richard's arm around all of us, everyone smiling. The caption read, "Family is everything, through thick and thin. God is good." 87 likes, 22 comments, hearts, prayer emojis. What a blessing. Pastor David called me that night. "Megan, your father is so happy you agreed to come. I think this could be a real turning point for your family. The congregation is looking forward to seeing you all together." I listened. I thanked him. I hung up. And I sat in my apartment looking at the big envelope on my kitchen table, and the phone beside it with a 4-minute and 22-second audio file. And I felt the weight of what I was about to do. Richard Moore had spent the entire week turning his Man of the Year ceremony into a story about being forgiven. The lost daughter returns. The family heals. The father's love wins. Everyone claps. He had written the script, picked the roles, and built the stage. He just forgot that I had learned to read. The night before the ceremony, I almost didn't go through with it. I sat at my kitchen table at midnight, staring at the records. 5 ER visits typed out in medical language, dates, descriptions, and the doctor's careful notes. Next to them, my phone loaded with 4 minutes and 22 seconds of my father's voice doing exactly what he had done my whole childhood. Only this time to his son. And I thought, what if I'm wrong? Not wrong about the facts. Those were printed in black and white. But wrong about what would happen. What if I stood up in that room and 200 people looked at me the way they had looked at me my whole life, like I was the problem? My phone buzzed. Ethan, calling from his friend's phone again. "Meg." His voice was barely a whisper. "Dad made me try on the suit tonight. He said if I say one wrong word tomorrow, he's pulling every dollar from the account." A pause. He measured my tie. "Meg." He actually stood there and measured my tie with a ruler to make sure it was straight. I closed my eyes. "I can't do this anymore," he said. "I can't sit up there and smile. I can't pretend we're okay, because we're not okay. We haven't been okay my whole life." And in his voice I heard myself. 14. Sitting on a bathroom floor. 16. Hiding cash in a tampon box. 18. Walking out a door and not looking back. Except I did look back, and the curtain fell. "You won't have to smile tomorrow," I said. "I promise." I wasn't going to the ceremony for revenge. I was going because I had made a promise to a 12-year-old boy 6 years ago, and I was not going to break it. Saturday morning, I laid everything out on the kitchen table. The envelope, 5 pages of medical records, each one stamped with the hospital's seal, dates ranging from age 9 to 15, medical language that said what no one in my family ever would. My phone fully charged. Linda's audio file ready and tested. A small Bluetooth speaker, the portable kind, the size of a coffee cup, tucked into my bag. I called Janet at Legal Aid one last time. If I play a recording that my mother made in her own home in front of a public group, "Ohio is a one-party consent state," she said. "Your mother made the recording. She consented. It's legal. And if I share my own medical records publicly? They're your records, Megan. You can do whatever you want with them." I breathed out. I chose my clothes carefully. A plain white button-up shirt, black slacks, flat shoes, no jewelry, no makeup beyond what I would wear to a shift at the hospital. I wanted to look exactly like what I was. A 24-year-old nurse who works 60 hours a week and pays her own rent. Not the troubled daughter my father had described. Not a victim putting on a show. Just a woman telling the truth in clean, simple clothes. I called my mother one final time. "Mom, you don't have to say anything. You just have to be there. But if you want to speak, you speak." Her breathing was uneven. "Okay. Okay, you'll be there? Or okay, you'll try." A long pause. I'll be there. I slid the envelope into my bag, zipped it shut, and picked up my keys. The ceremony started at 6. It was noon. 6 more hours of silence. And then, for the first time, I was going to break it. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my phone rang. Grandma Dot calling from the road. I'm an hour out, she said. Her voice had that strong, steady quality it always had. 72 years old, widowed, living alone in a 2-bedroom house outside Columbus, and still the only person in my family who had ever called things by their real names. Dorothy Jennings had tried to save us once before. When I was 8, she had come for a weekend visit. I was wearing a t-shirt, which was rare for me even then. And when I reached up to grab a glass from the cabinet, the sleeve pulled back and she saw the bruises. She didn't say anything to me. She went straight to my mother. I was in the next room. I heard everything. Linda, what happened to that child's arm? She fell. Mom, she's clumsy. Linda, I gave birth to you. Don't lie to me. My mother cried, but she didn't leave. Dot called Child Protective Services herself. A caseworker came, asked some questions, and left. My father handled it the same way he handled the ER reports. The same way he handled everything, with handshakes, with charm, with the quiet work of a man who knew everyone in a small town. After that, Dot was no longer welcome at the house on Maple Ridge. 16 years later, she was driving 2 hours on a Saturday afternoon to sit in a folding chair at the back of a church hall and watch her granddaughter do what she hadn't been able to. I've waited 16 years for someone to do what I didn't have the power to do, she said over the phone, her voice steady. I will be in that room, Megan. Whatever happens, I will be there. I told her I loved her. She told me to drive safe. That was enough. The fellowship hall at Grace Baptist Church smelled like carnations and lemon polish. Round tables covered in white linen. Paper programs at each seat. Gold lettering, a cross at the top, and in the center, Man of the Year Award, honoring Richard Moore. A podium at the front with a microphone, flanked by 2 flower arrangements and a banner that must have cost $300. The banner read, Faith, Family, Service. I almost laughed. 200 people filled the room. Church elders, their wives, families from the congregation, business partners, a few local officials, the kind of crowd that runs a small town, not by law, but by handshakes. My father knew every person in that room. He had built a deck for one, donated materials for another's garage, paid for a third person's daughter to go on a mission trip. Every favor was an investment, and tonight was his payoff. Richard stood near the front table in a navy suit, red tie, gold cufflinks that caught the light when he moved his hands, which he did often because Richard Moore speaks with his whole body when there is an audience. Linda stood beside him in a pale floral dress, hands clasped in front of her, eyes down. Ethan sat stiffly in a chair that looked like it might swallow him, wearing a suit he clearly hadn't picked out, his tie measured to perfect length. I walked in at 6:15, alone. Richard saw me from across the room. His face lit up for the audience's benefit, and he crossed the hall with his arms open. There she is. Everyone, my daughter's here. He hugged me. 200 people watched. A few clapped. I didn't hug him back. I didn't pull away either. I just stood still, arms at my sides, feeling his hands on my back. In my bag, the envelope pressed against my hip. Dot sat at a table in the back, watching. At 7 o'clock, Pastor David stepped to the podium. Tonight, we honor a man who has served this church and this community with steady dedication. A man of faith, a man of family, a man whose hands have literally built the walls around us. Laughter. Applause. Please welcome our Man of the Year, Richard Moore. Standing ovation. 200 people on their feet. My father walked to the podium the way he walked into every room, shoulders back, chin up, eyes sweeping the crowd like a man looking over land he owned. He gripped the podium and smiled. Thank you, Pastor David. Thank you, Grace Baptist. He paused, the way he always paused. Not because he needed to collect his thoughts, but because he knew that silence builds excitement. This past year has tested my family. Some of you know my daughter and I had a rough patch. A soft, sympathetic sound from the crowd. But she's here tonight. He looked at me. Because that's what family does. We come home. More applause. A woman at the table next to mine whispered, "Bless his heart." Then he said it. "Megan, Come on up here, sweetheart. Stand with your old man. 200 faces turned to me. The weight of what everyone expected, social, religious, and communal, pressed in from every direction. If I stayed seated, I was the ungrateful daughter. If I went up and played along, I was his prop. I stood, picked up my bag, and walked to the stage. Richard beamed. He put his arm around my shoulder, the same shoulder he had gripped in the ER a decade ago, and squeezed. I looked at his hand. Then I reached up and gently moved it off. Not violently. Not dramatically. I just took his hand and placed it back at his side. The room went quiet. And I saw it in his eyes for the first time in my life. Fear. I stepped to the microphone. Thank you, Pastor David, for letting me stand here tonight. My voice was steady. I had practiced this in my apartment 3 times. Not the words, just the steadiness. My father said I've been going through a hard time. He's right. I have. But not for the reasons he told you. Richard moved toward the microphone. Megan, that's enough. I stepped to the side, out of his reach, and kept going. I was taken to the county emergency room 5 times before I turned 16. Every time, my parents told the doctors I had fallen. Every time, the medical staff wrote down something different. I unzipped my bag and pulled out the envelope, set it on the podium, open, the hospital stamp visible. These are my medical records. My own records, which I have every legal right to share. They describe, and I'm quoting, repeated injuries that do not match the story given. On one visit, the attending doctor recommended a Child Protective Services follow-up. It never happened. Silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind where 200 people realize they are holding their breath. Richard's face had gone white. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. For a man who had built his entire life around controlling the room had just slipped out from under him. These records are right here, I said. On this podium. I'm not asking anyone to take my word for it. I'm asking you to read. A woman in the second row pressed her hand to her mouth. An older man I recognized from the deacon board leaned forward in his chair, staring at the podium like he was seeing it for the first time. Richard found his voice. She's lying. She's been unstable for years. I told you all. I didn't argue. I just opened the envelope and spread the pages across the podium. Read, I said. Richard turned to Pastor David, who was standing at the side of the stage with his hands frozen at his waist. David, this is a family matter. We don't need to. There's one more thing, I said. I took my phone from my bag and set the Bluetooth speaker on the podium. My hands were calm. I had checked the volume twice in the parking lot. I pressed play. The sound that filled the fellowship hall was impossible to mistake. My father's voice. Not the warm, smooth voice that charmed 200 church members, but the real one. The one that lived behind closed doors. Low, cold, final. You talk back to me one more time. A sharp sound. Something hitting something. Then Ethan, my brother, 18 years old, crying out. Sit down. Shut up. In this house what I say goes. 4 minutes and 22 seconds. The speaker wasn't loud, but in a room that quiet, it didn't need to be. Every word reached every table. Every gasp was heard. A mother near the back pulled her young son closer. One of the deacons, a man who had been at the cookout 2 days earlier laughing at Richard's jokes, stood up and walked out without a word. I stopped the recording. This was recorded by my mother, Linda Moore, in our family home last month. Under Ohio law, she had every right to record it. She was present. She consented. I looked at the room. Some faces were shocked. Some were crying. A few looked angry, at me maybe, or at themselves for not seeing it sooner. One woman near the front was shaking her head slowly, over and over, like she was trying to unsee something. Richard gripped the edge of the podium. You can't, that's private. That's my family. It stopped being private, I said, when it left bruises. A chair scraped at the back of the room. My grandmother stood up. 72 years old, gray cardigan, practical flat shoes, the kind of woman who irons her napkins and doesn't put up with nonsense. She didn't walk to the stage. She didn't need to. Her voice carried. My name is Dorothy Jennings. I'm Linda's mother. 16 years ago, I saw bruises on my granddaughter's arms and I called Child Protective Services. Nobody followed up. Because Richard Moore knows everybody in this town and everybody in this town wanted to believe the lawn was as perfect as it looked. She paused, looked slowly around the room, making eye contact with people she had known for decades. You all shook his hand every Sunday. I don't blame you. But now you know. She sat down. And then Ethan stood. My brother, 18, thin, still wearing the suit Richard had picked out and the tie Richard had measured, rose from his chair with his hands shaking at his sides. The room turned to him. I'm Ethan, he said. His voice shook, but he didn't stop. I'm 18, and my dad hits me. My sister is telling the truth. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. He sat back down, and I saw his hands gripping his knees under the table, white-knuckled, holding himself together. Then Linda stood. My mother, who had spent 28 years sitting, standing, walking, and breathing only within the limits of what Richard Moore allowed, stood up in the third row of a church fellowship hall in front of 200 people and said 6 words. I was silent too long. She's right. Then she pressed her hands to her face and cried. 3 people, 3 generations, and a room full of witnesses who could never unhear what they had just heard. Pastor David stepped forward. He stood at the side of the stage for a long moment, his hand on the back of a chair, looking at the floor. When he looked up, his face carried something I hadn't expected. Not shock but shame. The quiet, specific shame of a man realizing he had been standing 3 feet from the truth and looking the other way. Richard, he said. His voice was steady, but the warmth was gone. I need to speak with the deacon board right now. Richard tried once more. He reached for David's arm and dropped his voice to that close, reasonable murmur he had perfected, the one that had smoothed over every uncomfortable question for 30 years. David, listen to me. This is a misunderstanding. My family is going through a rough. Richard. Pastor David pulled his arm back. Not right now. The room shifted. Not all at once. Not like a movie moment where everyone stands and claps. It was slower than that and messier. Some people stared at their plates. Some whispered to each other. A woman I didn't know, mid-50s, glasses, the kind of face you would see behind a library counter, walked over to me, touched my arm, and said, I'm sorry, sweetheart. I didn't know. Now you do, I said. A few of Richard's closest friends, the cookout men, the ones who had heard his version of events for years, sat frozen. One of them got up and left without speaking to anyone. Another stared at Richard with an expression I recognized. The look of a man rearranging everything he thought he knew. Not everyone believed me that night. Some never would. But enough did. I stepped off the stage, walked to Ethan, and took his hand. Linda followed. We left through the side door, and I didn't look back. 72 hours. That's how long it took for the life my father had built to fall apart. 24 hours after the ceremony, the deacon board met. I wasn't in the room, but Ethan heard from a friend whose father was on the board. The vote to remove Richard from his position was unanimous. Not a single voice in his defense. The same men who had eaten his pulled pork and laughed at his jokes sat in a circle and voted him out without debate. 48 hours later, the 2 biggest contracts Richard's company depended on, both coming through church connections, were cancelled. The first was a $180,000 renovation of the church's east wing. The second was a $95,000 community center project for the county, sent over by a deacon's brother-in-law. Both pulled out with the same polite but final words. We feel it's best to go in a different direction at this time. 72 hours. I drove Linda and Ethan to the county courthouse. We filed for a temporary restraining order. The paperwork included my medical records, the audio recording, and a written statement from Ethan. The judge reviewed it in her office. Not a dramatic courtroom scene, just a tired woman in a small room reading through pages and listening to 4 minutes of audio on her laptop speakers. She granted the order before lunch. Richard Moore was banned from coming within 100 yards of his wife, his daughter, and his son. He was ordered to leave the house on Maple Ridge Lane. The house, it turned out, had both their names on the deed. Linda had been on the title since they bought it in 1998. Richard had acted like he owned it alone for 26 years. He didn't. He packed 2 bags and moved into a rental on the other side of town. The lawn on Maple Ridge was already getting long. The day after the restraining order was granted, Richard walked into First National Bank and withdrew every dollar from Ethan's savings account. $38,000. Gone before the teller finished counting. He thought it was a punishment, one final act of control. If he couldn't own his family, he would make sure his son paid for leaving. But Grandma Dot had planned for that. Your grandfather always said, "Never let a bully hold the checkbook," she told me over the phone, her voice matter of fact, like she was reading a grocery list. I listened. 5 years earlier, quietly without telling anyone, had opened an education savings account in Ethan's name. $200 a month pulled from her late husband's pension. $12,000. Not a fortune, but enough to keep the door open. And then the church did something I didn't expect. Within a week of the ceremony, a group of women from Grace Baptist, the same women who had brought casseroles to our house, who told my mother what a beautiful family she had, organized a scholarship collection for Ethan. They passed an envelope at the Sunday service. They posted about it on the church Facebook page. They sent checks in the mail. By the following Sunday, $8,400. $8,400 from the community, and a financial aid application that Ethan and I filled out together on my kitchen table on a Tuesday night, eating takeout pizza on paper plates. It wasn't $38,000. It wasn't the grand plan Richard had dangled and then yanked away. But it was enough. And the best part, Richard's decision to drain the account became the final proof of who he was. The man who stole his own son's college fund out of spite. Even the people who had been unsure stopped defending him after that. The leash was cut. 2 weeks after the ceremony, I drove to the house on Maple Ridge. It was strange pulling into that driveway without the Ford F-250 taking up the whole width of it. The flag was still on the porch. The lawn was uneven. The wreath was last season's. Linda was in the kitchen, not cooking, just sitting at the table, looking out the window at the backyard where the grill still sat, uncovered, rusting at the legs. The house was quieter than I had ever heard it. And for the first time, the quiet wasn't a warning sign. She didn't look up when I came in, but she spoke. "Do you forgive me?" I pulled out the chair across from her, sat down, and looked at my mother. Really looked at her. And I saw a woman I was still learning how to see. Not the villain, not the hero. Just a person who had been afraid for so long that fear became her personality, and silence became her language. And by the time she found her voice, her daughter had already grown up without one. "I don't know," I said. "And I don't need to know right now." Her face crumbled. "But you stood up," I said. "In that room, in front of everyone, you stood up. And that's the first step." I didn't hug her. I wanted to. Some part of me, the 10-year-old part, the part that had waited in a dark bedroom for her to come back and say, "It wasn't your fault," wanted to. But I wasn't that girl anymore. And pretending I was would have been a different kind of lie. So I just sat there beside her in the kitchen that used to feel like a trap and now just felt like a kitchen. We didn't say much. That was enough. A year later, the house on Maple Ridge Lane looked different. Not renovated. Linda didn't have the money for that. But the wreath was new. The lawn was mowed a little unevenly by Ethan when he was home on weekends. And the refrigerator, the same white Kenmore that had held my father's beer and my mother's leftovers for 20 years, now had a photo of Ethan on it, grinning in a college sweatshirt, standing next to a girl I hadn't met yet. My photo was up there too. A selfie I had sent Linda. Me in my scrubs after a 12-hour shift. Tired but smiling. She had printed it at the CVS and stuck it next to Ethan's with a daisy magnet. It was the first time a picture of me had been on that refrigerator. I was 25. Ethan was doing okay. Not Harvard. Not the grand plan Richard had turned into a weapon. A solid community college near Dot's house. An engineering track. A part-time job at a hardware store that gave him an employee discount on tools he actually wanted. He called me every Thursday. We mostly talked about nothing. It was the best part of my week. Linda was in therapy. She had gotten her driver's license, her first, at 50 years old. The day she passed the test, she sent me a photo of herself holding the card, and her smile was the most real expression I had ever seen on her face. We met every other week for coffee. Some visits were good, some were quiet, some were hard, but they happened, and that was more than I had had for 18 years. Richard lived alone in a one-bedroom rental across town. He had lost the deacon's seat, the contracts, the house, and the story he had told himself about who he was. Some people still believed him, but fewer every month. He never apologized. I stopped waiting for him to. I'm not telling you this story to teach you something. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a life coach. I'm a nurse who works 60 hours a week and owns one nice pair of shoes. I'm telling you because for 18 years, I thought I was the problem. I thought that if I were quieter, softer, more careful, if I could just stop pushing his buttons, my father would stop hurting me. And the person who should have told me that wasn't true was standing right there the whole time, whispering the opposite. So if anyone listening to this right now is sitting in a room where someone keeps telling you that you are the reason things are broken, you're not. You were never the reason. Silence isn't loyalty. Leaving isn't betrayal. And you never owe your image to someone who shattered yours. My mother was wrong for 18 years. But she was right once, the night she pressed record. And that one act of truth, late as it was, changed the course of 3 lives. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive her. Forgiveness isn't a light switch. It's not something you decide once and it's done. It's more like physical therapy. Some days you make progress. Some days it hurts more than the day before, and you show up anyway, because the other choice is staying broken. My name is Megan. I'm 25 now. I still live in that studio apartment. I still have the IKEA curtains. And for the first time in my life, I don't flinch when my phone rings. That's enough. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story touched you, like and subscribe. It helps more people hear it. And if you've got a story of your own, the comments are open. No judgment here. If you want to hear more, check the link in the description. Another story about boundaries, family, and the things that paper remembers when people choose to forget. I'll see you in the next one.